Hi guys, what is going on? Every so often I like to do one of these videos where I ask a question. So this is the question. My handwriting is not that good. And this is a question, there we go, we'll do it like that. Boom. We'll do a couple question marks. So the question is obviously and while we say these, we'll underline them. Is Procreate as good as Photoshop, right? And this is, for me, this is something I find myself constantly asking. This is something I find myself wrestling with. This is probably like, if there's a theme of my channel, the theme has always kind of been like Procreate versus Photoshop on some level, or Procreate being a viable tool. And I've flip-flopped on if it isn't a bunch of times. I've kind of gone through different kind of like thought processes and ringers and stuff about whether or not I think it is a good tool or the best tool, or, and whether or not I think it's the best tool or whatever. I still believe, for the most part, it's the future of like how people are gonna draw, just in this generation. I think no matter how I feel, or anyone or my peers or my contemporaries feel about it, I think it's literally the drawing tool for the future. And I don't think that's going to change no matter what any of us say or do, or go through, or how we feel about it. I think that's a big thing. So yeah, I'm gonna throw my 2 cents in while doing some sketching. Maybe for like 15 minutes, maybe half an hour. We'll see how long we go for. This is my M1 iPad Pro. I upgraded from, I used to have the original late 2018 model. And I've still got that. But I kind of killed the hard drive with Procreate files. And this is something I want Procreate. This is a minus for Procreate. This one point is that Procreate, unlike Artist Studio Pro and Clip Studio Paint, all those softwares, it doesn't save actually on your system. So when you're doing stuff in Procreate, it's actually in Procreate. It does take up space on your system, but it's not actually on your system the same way a lot of other things are on the system. So it can become quite strange when it comes to like, you want to export like every file. Say if I wanted to like take all of my files and just like ghost, I can't, because they're in Procreate. I'd have to do it some weird way, right? Apparently I can copy them to a new device and stuff, and in some obscure kind of like iTunes method. But I'd like to at some point to say, okay, I want all my files, and I can't take them. So that's for me, that's a minus. But we'll just talk about the software itself as art software. So I think the only thing that's really separating Procreate and Photoshop, the realistic truth, is that Procreate's brushes, the ones that are meant to be like Photoshop's, don't perform exactly the same way. And people say they're 90% as good. That's not true. They're not. They're probably 50% as good. Most of them, some of them, like this one I'm using right now, this is a Photoshop brush, right? Look at these strokes right here. Pretty good variations I'm getting, right? This brush is very, very similar to how it works in Photoshop. It's very close, right? But then there's a lot of other brushes. So for example, I don't know what brush this is, but I'm just gonna have a look. So this is literally like a variation of the one I was just using, but kind of like different. So let's find, here we go. This is a brush I love in Photoshop. Love this brush. And I still love it in Procreate, but it is not the same. It has a weird thinning thing it does. The opacity doesn't work the same way. The texture isn't as pronounced, nowhere near as pronounced. The edges of the texture are nowhere near as pronounced. The details in the brush itself aren't as sharp. In Photoshop, that brush is one of the absolute best brushes you could ever use. in Procreate, it's still a good brush, but it's very much average. So it's almost at 50% of its power. And that I think that is the thing that separates Procreate. Because when it was like, oh yeah, you can bring in Photoshop brush files, everyone was happy until they brought the files in and they didn't work as good. And that just kind of like when you have something like Photoshop that's had a brush engine that's been built up for ages by a bunch of artists in an entire, basically the entire concept art industry was on the back of Photoshop for a long time. There's a lot of things people have brought in, things people have done, brushes people have made, decisions people have made that, you know, for the most part are the gold standard. And that's kind of like what a lot of Photoshop stuff was. And then Procreate came along, this kind of like portable tool. It's like, well, it's Photoshop, but you can draw anywhere. The caveat is brushes for the most part aren't as good. Now, I was looking back at some of my old stuff, like the stuff I did when I first got the iPad, the stuff when I didn't care about bringing in Photoshop brushes because I didn't think it was possible, right? And I did a Hellboy piece. And honestly, it looks fantastic. The brushes that came with Procreate, I can't remember what they were. There were some of the wet brushes. It looks great. It just looks really good. And it makes me think, like, why did I never just carry on drawing in this style? And the truth of it is, it's probably due to the fact that a lot of the time, if you're already like an active professional, like you already make money doing this stuff, a lot of the time you don't just want to learn a new drawing tool because, and you don't want to learn a bunch of new brushes that aren't like the ones you've been using for God knows how long. Like I've been using Photoshop since 2008 or 7, right? I'd say 8, we'll say 2008. And I've been good at Photoshop since about 2009, because in 2008 I was just kind of learning. But I spent the entirety of 2008 learning to a point where in 2009 I was pretty good. To where on my second college course, I pretty much knew basically most of Photoshop's shortcuts to be able to practically tell people the shortcuts without having to look at a keyboard. And like walking them through processes of design by just giving them shortcut commands. There is a issue that you would have if you've invested that much time into Photoshop, and then you kind of like, you know, Procreate says, okay, now you can use your Photoshop brushes. And you're like, okay, cool, that's fantastic. You load them up and they just don't work well. You know, and it just seems like it's an iPad issue. It seems like it's some weird issue. But I know for a fact that this iPad is stronger than my PC from 2008 that could run a lot of my brushes perfectly fine. So the issue is the brush engine. And that's fine because Procreate isn't Photoshop. Neither is Clip Studio, neither is Autodesk, Sketchbook. Not any of these other software aren't Photoshop. They don't have to be Photoshop. The only issue is that's what you're competing with. So you don't have to be Photoshop, but the competition is Photoshop. And the competition that's using Photoshop, they're not going to want to kind of trade their brushes. Now, there are a lot of brushes in here that are good. Like the round brush is good. It's not the same, but it's good. There's a bunch of brushes that are cold in Procreate. Cold that I really like. But then also, there's a bunch of brushes that could be really cold, but they're just lacking some Photoshop sauce. Now, this all goes towards answering the question, you know, is Procreate a viable tool in comparison to Photoshop? There's a lot of things it doesn't have that would make life a lot easier. But in terms of just like being able to exist and paint anywhere in the world at any time and have the possibility, because you can, of creating completely and utterly professional work, clean, finished work, it's a no-brainer that Procreate is better for that. And I know there's a iOS version of Photoshop When I first downloaded that thing, it was absolute garbage, and Lucid Pixel did a video on it, and he said, just delete it off your iPad, and he was right. It's just garbage. I haven't used it since, and that because of that experience, I honestly don't feel like ever using it. I don't think it makes any sense to ever use whatever version of Photoshop they're trying to pedal towards, because it's not Photoshop. Why would you release something pretending it's Photoshop when it's like some little half-baked version? And the upsetting thing is this. There are, as I said, this iPad, I know for a fact, is much more powerful than the machine I used to use in 2010. Let's just say 2010. Let's say 2008 to 2010. Because I didn't get a Mac till about 2012, right? And I had a Dell Inspiron 1720. It had, I think it had 4 gig RAM. It was at its time, it was a beast. Dell had these Dell Inspirons 1530s, and they were like the standard, and the Dell Inspiron 1720 was like the one up. I remember I got that, and I was over the moon with it. A 15-inch display or a 17-inch display. It was big, beautiful computer. And I used it for years and years. I even used it sometimes when I end up getting a Mac, because I liked to use non-display tablets, because I bought a Wacom Cintiq, a 12-inch one. My grandmother gave me some money. R.I.P. grandmother. My grandmother died last year. My grandmother gave me some money, and I bought a Cintiq with it, and that was probably the single most pivotal present that anyone's ever bought me, because it made me more dedicated to what I was already doing. It solidified the journey that I put myself on in my mind, because I was already on the digital art journey. And I bought that Cintiq, and in having the Cintiq and all of that stuff, I started to look at kind of like digital art completely differently, and that made me more dedicated and stay on track, and that made me ultimately become kind of like a freelance artist like I am today. But also it made me kind of like feel the difference between a screen display tablet and a regular graphics tablet. Now, funnily enough, I had the Cintiq, but it was the 12-inch, because I couldn't afford the big one. That's the truth. She gave me, I think she gave me £1,000, and I think the other one was like $2,000 or 1,500. I just didn't have the dough. I was young. I was like 16, so I didn't have the dough. So I got the small one, and for the life of me, it was good. It was a good experience, but it was just too small. And it got to a point where I was making do with it. That's kind of been the story of my life. A lot of the time, it's make do. Make do. Adversity, make do. But I was making do with it. But then sometimes I would switch to my Windows computer, and I would just use a regular Wacom Intuos, or I would use the Cintiq, but I would use it in, we used to have this pan scroll mode where you could click the bottom button on your Cintiq, and your Cintiq would work as a regular Wacom tablet. So you could kind of draw across both of your displays, the Cintiq and the other display. And I used to draw using the Cintiq as a Wacom instead of it. So it was a very strange experience. I wasn't using much of the Cintiq's real estate, but I was just using it like an Intuos. And this is before I had an Intuos. Before that, I did have another tablet. It was called a Genius 8x6. It was like an Intuos. It was promoted by this YouTube artist called Nico Di Matteo as like a cheap alternative to Wacom. And it was fantastic. It had the same amount of pressure as a Wacom Intuos 3 at the time. Great tablet. I ended up giving that to a friend. Well, I ended up borrowing it to a friend. He just never gave it back. And I don't even think he used it. I just think he took it and just like, because he wanted to borrow it. But I wanted to help him out at the time, and I just like let him take it. But yeah, it was a great tablet. But I had my Cintiq, so I didn't care that he took it. I was already kind of like moving in a different direction. Anyway, so the Genius 8x6 was gone. I had the Cintiq, and I kind of like went back into my old ways of like painting with a non-display tablet. a lot of the time on this Windows machine, until kind of like finally I just decided to start working on the Cintiq a lot, and I did like the feeling. Now I'm talking about all this stuff because ultimately I ended up getting these iPad Pros, which are very similar to Cintiqs but just bigger. Like this iPad Pro I have today is bigger than my Cintiq, and this iPad is more powerful than that machine I had, and that those two things could run Photoshop back in 2009, 10, 11, whatever, 12. It's now 2023. This iPad can definitely run a desktop version of Photoshop. So why is Adobe peddling some unfinished iPad version of Photoshop when Adobe should be peddling a finished old version of Photoshop, at least with some upgrades to make it more applicable to an iPad, instead of trying to, let's translate Photoshop to iPad? Clip Studio Paint has their entire software just on the iPad. Like it's literally the exact same software that they put on desktops. And I just don't, and the same thing with Affinity Photo. They have literally their whole software like on the iPad. Versus like Photoshop. Photoshop doesn't have their entire software on the iPad. Photoshop has like this weird little demi beast version of it. Like it just feels like Adobe Fresco kind of, and I just don't understand what they're trying to do with that. It doesn't make sense to me at all. Because if they would have, and it's almost like divine intervention. If they would have put a real version of Photoshop on the iPad, the people that use Procreate goes down. Especially if they add the whole record feature that Procreate has. Procreate's user base would have gone down drastically. Because Procreate is literally the best Photoshop stand-in that's on iPad. That's all it is. It's a Photoshop stand-in. It has its own cool features. It's doing its own things, has some advantages. And I've made videos about what I think it does better than Photoshop and cool things it does. And to my detriment, some of the stuff it does are, they go against me, like the whole file management thing. Like it's a good feature, but it goes against me because it has all these files in its own little place, but it doesn't actually have them on the iPad, the same way that a lot of software has stuff on the iPad, right? But I digress. If Adobe would have released a real version of Photoshop to combat Procreate, they would have won the battle, because people would just be taking their brush packs, taking everything they've got from their desktops and just coming straight over here. Everything. All their filters, all the actions, everything. If they did that properly, if they made that transition smooth, and really did that the way they should have, in most people's opinions, they would have been the clear winners. And in a few years, Procreate would have had to either step up its game drastically or just fade away, just accept second best. But now Procreate doesn't have to accept second best because Photoshop, quite frankly, hasn't stepped up. Adobe hasn't stepped up to be the software that we thought that they were, and that's just the truth of it. They haven't stepped up, not enough to secure the custom of everybody that they need to, and you could call it sad, whatever. I don't think it's sad. I just think it's the game. Sometimes in history, kingdoms run for a period of time, but then eventually they get conquered. And that's what I think is happening with the Photoshop situation. Now, Photoshop's not going anywhere, but I'm talking about for people that draw. The base standard of digital drawing now, you can get an iPad. You can get an iPad and you can pay $10 or £10 and you can get this software that lasts forever, that isn't subscription based, that is yours, that literally has a bunch of features straight out the gate, that has a low learning curve, all these things that, everybody's using, everyone's sharing tricks on. There's all these Procreate tricks. There's all these guys making Procreate brushes, these people making Procreate brushes, should I say. It's not just guys just making Procreate brushes, doing a bunch of stuff, making Procreate work better, than it was. And, it's breaking the mold in a lot of ways from what it was. So, it ultimately, is Procreate a professional tool? Absolutely, positively. I'm switching to another Photoshop brush now. This brush works pretty well in Procreate as well. I'm purposely using the ones that work pretty well. because they're the only ones I actually like to use. I've been using this one a bunch. This one has a really cool texture. I'll be honest, guys. I should have just done this as a live stream because I am so tired. Like, it was Valentine's Day today. I've been out all day. I've been busy. I've done a bunch of stuff. I was doing some editing before this, like some client work. I also do like video editing, doing some client work, and I'm just tired. And I'm just like, literally, I'm at the end of my rope. But I thought, yo, let me pick up the iPad. Like, I had an artistic thought, and I just thought, yo, let me just pick up the iPad and just like rant for a little bit and do some kind of just sketching stuff. Because I never just pick up the iPad and sketch. And for me, I think I need to do more of it. So I think that's how I'll make YouTube videos from now on. I'm still going to do the time-lapse stuff. I'm still going to talk over the time-lapses. I'm still going to get music in there and stuff like that, because I do also like to do that stuff. But I think it's going to be more of this stuff for me, just sketching and talking and just going through the process and just, thinking about stuff, because I have missed creating YouTube videos. I've missed putting things out into the ether, man. I've missed it. I like putting things out into the ether. I like to express myself. I like to show people what I'm working on. I like to be, someone who's active in the art community on some level. I used to have a Facebook group that was given to me by someone I used to watch. I used to watch a guy stream on Ustream. Was it Ustream or was it Livestream? I think it was Ustream. Because there was a few. There was Ustream and Livestream, which were very similar. And basically just like Twitch. Literally. Twitch has just got a cooler name, but they're all just streaming platforms, and they existed. They existed before Twitch. I used to watch a guy on Ustream back in the day. Alex Ruiz, his name was, and he still is a concept artist now, and he was inspired by Android Jones, and he did a lot of this kind of shape stuff, but he didn't Photoshop, because at that time he had Corel Painter, but he wasn't taken to Painter the same way, because Painter is a software that, and now we're going to jump on the Corel Painter tangent. Painter is a software that it doesn't bring anything to you. You go into Painter and you make what's yours. It's a very strange, even a strange thing to even talk about, because it's not traditional how you operate in Painter. You literally have to go through a process of finding what works for you and just sticking to it, or diversifying. And that's how I worked in Painter. I found certain brushes, certain tools that I thought were good, and literally kind of like stayed within that, and then I added some more. There was a bunch that, I thought that were like good tools, and I added them to my overall process and whatever, and yeah, it's a good software, strong, reliable. It kind of like manages files well. It blends paint better than any software I've ever seen. Clip Studio also blends paint really well, but Clip Studio doesn't have as many cool brushes as Painter. Painter is like literally brush central. Like, even just out the box, Painter has a bunch of brushes that just loaded into it that are just ridiculous. But it's literally like the thing about Corel Painter though as well is it's a very obscure software, so it's not very well known. People don't really know about it. I think its biggest popularity comes from people like Android Jones that use it kind of heavily, but because he doesn't make content for some reason, which he should have been doing for a long time, because he doesn't make kind of like constant content, and my condolences to Android Jones for what's happened to his home. Because he doesn't make constant content, a lot of people don't really get to see Painter in action, and Painter is a great software. Painter has a lot of the features Procreate has: perspective grids, symmetrical drawing, all that kind of stuff. But Painter had it a long time ago. I'm not to say that any other software didn't have it, but Painter had it probably before a lot of the other software. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Before Photoshop, before Clip Studio. But remember, Clip Studios existed a long time as well as Manga Studio. Like, I remember like 2009, 8, 9, being at college, and Manga Studio was a thing. So, and people have forgotten that. I haven't forgotten. Clip Studio used to be Manga Studio, and it was a thing. Like Imagine FX did a piece with Dave Gibbons, the DC artist, and he was drawing Rorschach in it. So, you know, Clip Studio has been a thing for a long time. It doesn't get its credit it deserves a lot of the time as this kind of like great software that came along and changed things, because it's like a more mainstream Coral Painter, but because it's directly for comics, you get a lot of kind of comic guys using it, and like, using it well and showing people like some good stuff in it. So looking at that other cheek, I'm like, well, you need like a horn on the other side. There we go. A little shadow at the bottom. But yeah, I haven't done this in a while. Like, I haven't just opened Procreate and just been like, okay, boom, we're just gonna paint something. And the sad thing is, this is the sad part about that, is when I do that, I tend to have a lot of success, because this is like my natural state, is just like painting, like free flowing, not doing too much like selections, not just straight painting, just free flowing. And this is like where you can get the most out of me if you're gonna utilize me. If someone was gonna be like, okay, this is the flow guy, I guess that's who I am. I'm like the flow guy. But yeah, for me, I don't do this often enough, because oftentimes I'm always being pretentious when I open Procreate. I'm trying to do something specific instead of just chilling out. Sometimes it's good to just chill out and not be pretentious. And I'm just saying, take that advice from an old man. Take that from me. I've I love art. I've loved art. I've spent so much time drawing and painting. More than most people around me, and I've missed out on a lot of stuff to kind of just draw and paint. And I'll be real, like, sometimes you just gotta just open the software and just draw. And I think my best pieces I've ever done have been like that. Some of them have been planned, but my favorite pieces from me, the ones I look at, the ones when I open my phone and I go through like my gallery, my favorite pieces are the ones where I've just kind of gone, okay, boom, I'm just gonna draw something. And you end up having a moment, or two. Here I'm doing some kind of techie stuff. I like tech. I like mech. I like all that stuff. If it's not obvious by this thing I've been painting, right? And I'll be real, a lot of that stuff, you don't have to be an engineer to be able to draw mech stuff. You just have to kind of like think, okay, well, it's a human skeleton, basically. These are phalanges, these are knuckles. Literally, that's what these are. These are just knuckles. How do I convey that, in a technical way, by adding like physical shapes, basically. Yeah, and we can have like a line. So if you have physical shapes. So what I was going to do, I was just going to select this whole hand and just like pull out. So let's just kind of like go a little bit further down, because I think the hand's a little bit off, just a tidbit. I'll go down and just express like boom. But then you have to express, okay, well, the fingers have sides. But yeah, so I love mech. And but when I do mech, it's not just meant to be mech though. A lot of the time I'm thinking about these machines as like having souls, like, and I used to, like, you know, when you watch Gundam Wing, I used to watch Gundam Wing. I'm saying, you know, when you watch Gundam Wing, like everyone's watched Gundam Wing, and I understand that a lot of the people that watch art videos are quite young as well, so you might not have seen Gundam Wing, right? But in Gundam Wing, the Gundams are so cool looking, and they do so much in the show that there's a point in time where I used to look at them like, yo, the Gundams are alive. The Gundams aren't alive. They're robots. They're not even robots. They are mobile suits. So they are literally Iron Man armors. But just giant. Gundams are huge. Right? They're like giant Iron Man armors. You know, you put a Gundam on and you go to battle basically with a Gundam. Because Gundams are just huge war machines. And damn near in every Gundam series, that's what they are. Huge war machines that kick complete ass. They're stronger than all the other war machines because a lot of the time they're made of Gundanium, or just because they're built better. I don't think Gundanium's always referenced, but in Gundam Wing, as I said, there was a time when I was like, yeah, the Gundams are alive. That was wrong, but so I think Gundam Wing, Iron Man, a bunch of things in my childhood sparked like my love for armor and stuff like that, right? But it's not just like mech armor, and you know, I gravitate more towards like mechy techie armor, but I like regular armor. I like knights, I like samurais, I like characters in armor has always been a thing that I thought was, you know, the coolest, right? Just because I think, okay, it gives them another layer of power, or it just gives them another layer to their character, physical layer to their character that you can't get without armor, you know, or without some kind of like overcoat thing going on. This would be so much easier if I had like a live chat, but I'm not live, so I was just thinking about like the whole talking while I'm drawing thing. It'd just be easier with a live chat. But I am extremely tired, so I need someone to like point the messages out to me, the good ones, but I don't, you know. Alright, so you guys know what ambient light is? What I'm doing here, I'm just adding some little bit ambient light. Well, this is kind of ambient light. This is like kind of more like a light source, to be fair, like a direct light source. It's not really ambient light. But I'm trying to make it like this little power source isn't that bright, but I holistically believe it would be, because it's probably my idea for it is to make it like a glowing orb, so I think it would be. And I'm even gonna paint some stuff in to make it even brighter, because it's like it's not bright enough right now. I kind of always cop out to this kind of like this design that I've got here. You see this like I'm gonna put this thing. Let me get red so we can see. I always kind of default to this kind of like pointy face thing. That's literally referenced like from Gundam. Like one of my Gundam models had that. It might have been Wing Zero. I can't remember which Gundam it was, but it had that, and I was like, yeah. As a kid, I was like, yeah, cool. And I think one time, because I'm an children, we do weird stuff sometimes, right? And I was a kid, and I played with toys till I was probably like, I don't know, 12 or something. Not really played with them. I more ripped them to pieces and made characters out of them. I used to think about combat. Like I'm very much thinking about shonen stuff all the time. That's why like I love power scaling videos and stuff. I love when people talk about how powerful characters are, stuff like that. I don't always agree with them, but I love a lot of that stuff. Who would win this fight? Blah blah blah. Right. So I used to kind of like take my toys apart and try and create combat scenarios with characters like, oh, this character would win versus this character, blah 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 blah. And one time I ripped something off a Gundam, stuck it together. I used to use blue tack a lot. It was weird. And I made like a character that had like this thing, kind of like as its like armor, like something like that, like a sticking forward kind of beaky face as its armor. And for me that was a big thing. That was like, yo, this is cool. And I was just thinking just then, this is separate, this is completely unrelated, but I was thinking, I hope the audio is good on this video, because I'm pretty sure I've covered the mic a bunch of times. Just even since just we've been sat here, I think I've covered the mic a bunch of times. So I'm hoping the audio is not shot, but we'll see. All right, let's have a flip. We haven't flipped the entire time. Boom. So the flip's not bad. When we do the flip, normally, yo, you see everything. You see so much negativity. You're like, oh, this is trash. This flip weren't that bad. I'm thinking maybe, though. Now, I want this to be a pretty long-armed mech, but I'm just going to pull this back a little bit and make that a little smaller. Boom. Right? But, yo, listen, people, I have not just done this for so long. So what I'm going to do, here's a trick, right? We'll duplicate this, gives us a little bit more volume. We'll merge that down. We'll do it again, duplicate, boom. We'll take that one and we'll just drag him down. And we'll make him smaller. We'll hit, in fact, freeform works. We'll make him smaller. Significantly smaller, actually, boom. And he can go here, right? Now, obviously he's not complete. That's an easy fix. That's like literally a few brush strokes. So here we go, solid brush strokes. Because he's going to be in the background. Because if you ever want to fill up your background, this is how you can do it. Because no one can see that anyway, right? So he's in the background. He's doing his thing. He's going to stay in this version of, the character. So you could just turn the opacity down and he's in the background now. Easy peasy. Yeah, just like that, he's in the background. But your best bet is to probably clip and mask it, throw a white layer over it, or whatever color you're going to go with, and then just drop that opacity, right? Because you might change the background color to something else, and then you're going to have to change that to something else. So, for example, if I go background, I want the background to be sky blue, right? Now, because he's white, it already works, but we can now tint his white. Boom. So now it works a little bit better for us. So now we've got two characters, or two mechs or whatever. Maybe these are like the standard mech. Maybe this mech is a twin mech. Maybe this mech knows shadow clone jutsu. Who knows? But we have two mechs now, right? And our scene has diversified. Now, another thing we could do is duplicate that. We could group it, my bad. And then we could duplicate the group. Boom. Flatten the group. Flatten means you make it one layer. Hide the other one, hide the old one, and have the flattened one. And just even motion blur that mech. So that mech's moving now. And it's more separation between our kind of like foreground big dog mech. So it's more separation between this guy and this guy. To where this, like, our main guy is still important. He's still important on every level. He's the most important. He is the subject. He is the focal point. This dude is the focal point. Unless we put like a human here, which I'm thinking about doing. But this human that's gonna be here will not be the focal point. The focal point, the eyes, everything, the composition, no matter flipped or not, yeah. If we flip it back, blah blah blah, the composition it's literally hitting here. This is the point. And that is the whole point. And composition is another thing. Composition is another conversation. Entirely another conversation. It just is. So another thing we can do is we can hit distort and we can hit warp. So we can distort this as well. This doesn't have to be just like the one we've got. We can distort this. We can do a bunch of stuff to it to make it a little bit more kind of like fit what we're trying to do. We can smudge parts of it so we don't have to paint too much in. We could like more with the smudge tool, we could add more blur, but we don't have to. Like with this part, there's a part here, right? See this part? Right here. I know I don't have a cursor. It doesn't look very, it just looks weird, right? Get the smudge tool and just drag it along. All of a sudden, it looks a lot better than it did. You see what I'm saying? So there's a bunch of stuff you could do that enhance the image. We could even go in to that layer and we could change the hue saturation and make it a different mech. Now it's a different mech. You know, it was the same mech before. Now he is the green energy mech and I'm the blue energy mech, right? Just like that. So maybe he's the toxic waste mech and maybe I'm the natural energy mech. Whatever. We have differences now going on in our image. But look, I didn't come here to talk about images. I got dragged into a lot of different things. You guys forced me to draw for ages. Okay. I think that's where I'm going to leave this. I don't know how long I've been drawing for. I don't know how long I've been talking for. Guys, it was nice to kind of see you, hear from you, all that stuff. It was nice to draw for you. This is what happens when I just sit down and Procreate and draw. Yeah, I'll probably be doing something about a brush pack, a Photoshop applicable brush pack at some point. I'm probably going to finish this. I'm probably going to try and just finish it on stream or on video. So I'm probably not going to progress with this piece until I've finished it on video for you guys. Just so you can see like what happens when I just sit around and just do like painting, just paint. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. Whoa. Sorry, guys. I did not mean to do that. I'm literally trying to... Okay. Peace, guys.